It breaks my heart to do this video. It really does. Um, when I started this channel, I wanted to keep this channel even when I started work. And I wanted to keep this channel when I started work because just in case, meaning you go in to work for a Russian station, and because you don't necessarily know, there's a lot of talk about people being pushed to take certain perspectives. Well, my thought was plan B was always keep the channel in reserve. You always have the channel, worst come to worst. And so that didn't happen. Ironically, what ended up happening was my own government did an end run around the First Amendment in order to shut us down. Truth be told, my job was only to tell the truth. And yet, the federal government didn't like what I was saying. Not just didn't like what I was saying, I would argue it had more to do with losing the Ukraine war and having this feeling that a multipolar world was coming into essence and it was losing its grip. But either way, insecurity or otherwise, it was that ended up happening. I started this channel about 10 years ago, give or take. I don't know the exact time frame. And one of the people who was around me at the same time was Cal Kulinski. Now, Cal Kulinski had the show Secular Talk. And I remember when I first saw it, I was like, whoa, Rachel Maddow is killing it. And then I realized, oh, this is not Rachel Maddow. This is actually a lefty show that had pretty strong lefty bona fides at the time frame. One catch, vote Democrat. And I don't necessarily pay attention to Secular Talk all that much these days, but I came across a tweet that Cal Kulinski did that made me realize that many of these lefty shows are just appendages of the Democratic Party, that they function, regardless of what they may say. They may take an opposition on certain things, but all things being equal, when it comes down to it, vote Democrat. It is blue, no matter who. I don't care if they're supporting the genocide. I don't care if they're pro-war. I don't care. We just need to put a Democrat in office. Cal seems to be one of those people. I'm going to show you this tweet. The reason why I say this, I only see Democrats saying this. It just as a rule, it's one of those. Oh man, I killed the tweet. 1 second. I need to find this exact tweet. But Cal goes after Joe Rogan. Now, he goes after him in a very specific way, where he points out that Joe Rogan is effectively MAGA, a Trump Republican. Now, the wild part about this is Joe Rogan is just Joe Rogan. Like, meaning he's the everyman. The random person will listen to Joe Rogan and there'll be things that they agree with and there'll be things they disagree with. The rub is, that's how most people are. Most people are not politically wed to a particular position. Most people float in regards to there be some things that are somewhat on the right, there be some things that are somewhat on the left, and that's kind of the way they operate. When you see people with a very specific context of the world, well, especially if they seem to group within that context. Meaning, I've seen Democrats say stuff like Joe Rogan is the devil. I've seen Democrats say stuff like Kamala Harris should go on Joe Rogan's show. And again, that ended up being a mistake that even Carville flips out over because they should have went on Joe Rogan's show. I'm trying to point to, though, that that's the way Democrats think. That's the way liberals think. Because Joe Rogan would say stuff on the left, and he would say stuff that would be considered on the right, and somewhere in between. Joe Rogan was a Bernie crack. Joe Rogan was a Bernie crack. And it wasn't that Joe Rogan left the Democratic Party. I would argue the Democratic Party left Joe Rogan, just like I would say the Democratic Party left me. Right here. Rogan is a fake independent media, barely a comedian anymore, and he's morphed into the state media for Trump. He's more like Rush Limbaugh than George Carlin. That's amazing coming from Cal, who's morphed into a Democrat. I mean, the idea, Joe Biden, when he's in office, MSNBC is effectively state media. Democrats are effectively state media. Cal Kulinski spent his time telling his audience that Kamala Harris was going to win. I have no idea where he gets this from. And yet, that was what he was boosting to his audience. So right here, for example, listen to this. This is astonishing to me because I remember on my show, when I went through the chart, it was clear that Trump was going to win. And I wasn't using anything else. I was just using the polling that was coming out with a clear eye. I would point out, Cal didn't have a clear eye. Cal was so enraptured with boosting Kamala Harris that he effectively was auditioning for MSNBC in regards to how vociferous he was in pushing this candidate that was pro-genocide, pro-war. I mean, for God's sake, the Democratic Party derided Donald Trump for trying to make a deal with North Korea, derided him for saying he was going to end the war in Ukraine. They derided him for these things, even to the point where Vance had to tell Mike Waltz, compromise is not a bad thing. Just think about that. That Republican has to tell a Democrat that compromise is not a bad thing. This is Cal on election day boosting that Harris looked like she was going to win. But listen to what he says, though, because this is the best part.
All right, guys, I already have some massive election updates for you. We just got our first exit polls that came in, and it's beginning to paint a pretty clear picture. And I don't want to get ahead of myself here, but it seems like the picture I've been painting for you guys for weeks now. So
it seems like the picture I've been painting you guys for weeks now. What would that picture be, Cal? What would that picture be that you've been painting for weeks to your audience? What would that be? What would that be? Let's hear. So I went back to look at some of Secular Talk's videos because I was clear. Okay, what is this picture that Cal has been painting for weeks? For weeks. Let's take a look.
Bearish on Kamala. And in other words, my most bullish on Trump. You ready? So this is the first map. Sort of like a worst case scenario for Kamala or best case scenario for Trump. Here we go. In a worst case scenario for Kamala, best case scenario for Trump map, I still have Kamala winning 276 electoral votes.
In the worst case scenario, in the worst case scenario for the map, I have Kamala winning. And he goes in later and talks about swing states. In fact, I'll just go to it. When he goes into this thing about Kamala's chances in the various swing states, and it just becomes sad and comical. Right here.
These states. I have him losing Michigan and Pennsylvania and Wisconsin. I don't see an argument based on the polling, based on all the data we've seen so far. I don't see an argument for him grabbing any of these states. I just don't.
He got all those states. He got all those states. He got all those states. And not just got all those states. Before the election, I did a video where I went from state to state and was able to hit it. But again, what I'm trying to point out here is it wasn't any magical polling that was out there. It was clear as day to anybody that was just honestly assessing what was happening, that the trend had shifted to Trump. And my only question was whether he was going to take Michigan or not. I wanted him to lose Michigan, everything. Didn't wanted Kamala Harris to lose Michigan. Even if she won the race, I wanted her to at least lose Michigan because they were backing a genocide, and at the very least, you shouldn't prosper when you're backing a genocide. Fair enough. But looking at the rest of the map, though, it was clear that Pennsylvania and many of these other states were trending towards Trump. I have no idea what Kyle was looking at in regards to the polling. Kamala Harris' own internal polling did not have her ahead at any point in this race. I have no idea what Kyle was looking at, especially within the last couple of weeks leading into the election, the exact same weeks that he was boosting Kamala Harris to his audience and giving them false hope that she was going to win. If he was on MSNBC, this would be forgivable. But he's not on MSNBC. He's supposed to be an independent, I guess, news person in the context of what takes place in the United States in regards to domestic news. The only point I'm making out here is you have lost the thread. Joe Rogan is not a right-winger. Elon Musk, believe it or not, probably is not a right-winger. These people were Democrats. I used to be a Democrat. But the party has moved in such a weird direction that you've lost and alienated so many people that were in the country. I mean, for God's sake, the Teamsters didn't even promote Kamala Harris. They ended up, because the majority of their members were going to vote for Trump. So you had a situation where the working class voted for a billionaire. You have to deal with that. Meaning you have to figure out why would a working class go for a blue-collar billionaire as opposed to the party that was supposed to be representing the interests of the working class. Now, you're going to spend your time boosting Kamala. I didn't do that because I realized that the issue is the Democratic Party. If you ask somebody, what does the Democratic Party stand for? I don't have an answer for that. And if you go back to when, what's her name? The one came in before Kamala Harris that was giving Hillary Clinton answers. She didn't have an answer for that. And she was leading the DNC. It seems like groups like the Young Turks, Secular Talk, what's the other one? David Pac-Man. All of these guys seem to be appendages for the Democratic Party that regardless of what they may say over the course of the election, meaning before the election takes place, at the end of the day, no matter what happens, whether you're backing a genocide or not, they would say you must vote the Democrat. I know I might have said bad things about them over the time frame, but you must vote Democrat. Sheepdogging their people into a broken party. Instead of attacking the party and pointing out you don't represent the interests of the public, as opposed to voting blue no matter who, where you create weak candidates because they know that regardless of who they put up, you vote for them, or people like you would vote for them, and people like you would tell your viewers to vote for them. It's like, what is the incentive of getting a candidate that actually represents something where people would legitimately feel they would go to the mat for workers, or a party, mind-blowing thing, representing the working class, something that the Democratic Party used to do. What I'm saying is, blue no matter who incentivizes weak candidates. And those weak candidates, you will vote for them. People who listen to you will vote for them. And people who listen to you will get all hopped up on joy and a bit of hope, even though the candidate loses. Even though the candidate loses. A clear eye, as opposed to just being a liberal Democrat that is in this kind of democratic context of the world, would have seen that. But instead, you have Cal Kulinski, the liberal, looking at this with hope, a bit of joy, and looking for any little thing that happens to give them hope that Kamala Harris was going to win, and run to his audience and tell them that exact same thing. He would fit as thoroughly comfortable on MSNBC as he was apparently on his show. It looks like he was trying to get a job. It's that bad. Look, man, I get it, right? It's not that Trump is great, but you kind of have to engage why your party, and it is your party. I mean, obviously at this point, how they would lose to him. How do you lose the working class? Those are things that you need to honestly engage when you have 8 million people that said, screw it, and just not show up. If Kamala Harris got Joe Biden numbers, she would have won that race. And sure, you could say, well, you know, people were misogynistic, Black people weren't loyal enough, the young voters should have came. Oh, you can say all that stuff, but at the end of the day, the candidate, it's their job to get the vote. And if people like you who support weak candidates always will back the candidate regardless of how weak they are, then you can't necessarily be mind blown when people don't show up to the polls, which is exactly what happened. If Harris got Joe Biden numbers, Harris would have won. Harris didn't get Joe Biden numbers, ergo, Harris lost. And as opposed to telling your audience, this is a weak candidate, this party doesn't represent or worth a damn, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, it was Kamala triumphalism, leading to the big letdown on election night, when you had to look your audience in the face and say, hey guys, you know everything I was telling you for the last several weeks? Just forget that happened. Just forget that happened. Look, man, all I'm pointing out is if you're attacking Joe Rogan, you've missed the boat. You've radically missed the boat. Joe Rogan is every man. And what I mean by that is, it's not that you're going to agree with any and everything that Joe Rogan says. The catch is, you would never agree with what most people says. Joe Rogan sits there and talks to people for hours, regardless of where they're from. And some of those people you will find detestable as a Democrat. Others you will be okay with. Kulinski was interviewed by Joe Rogan himself. Joe Rogan, they try to make him out to be this MAGA right-wing ogre. The guy was a Bernie-crat. And if you had a Democratic Party that was actually worth a damn, maybe you'd have a Joe Rogan. And one more point. I literally lost my job because the federal government decided to invoke censorship and do an end run around the First Amendment. You get John Kerry, Democrat, saying, hey, the First Amendment is a problem. Maybe we need to do something about that. You get Kamala Harris saying, we need to do something about Twitter because, you know, the 50-50 spread of Democrat and Republican that's on the platform, that the platform represents, is given too much ability for people to speak their piece, to speak their minds. You already have YouTube and Facebook censoring, actively censoring. You get Hillary Clinton, who says she wants to throw people in jail when they say stuff that Hillary Clinton doesn't like. Hillary Clinton was one of the main purveyors of the Trump and Russia hoax. It was a psyop on the American public, in one sense, to excuse the fact that she failed miserably in their campaign, and in another sense, to damage him after he gets in office. Part of the reason that Joe Rogan also had issues with your candidate was because of censorship. It's people like you who look at Joe Rogan and say, this guy's MAGA, when really he's just a regular person. This notion of trying to limit speech, especially for platforms, whether it's YouTube or anything else. I remember when YouTube demonetized Cal to the tune of 95%. I felt so bad for Cal. I myself was literally thinking about sending him money in order to help Cal out. And I don't mean much. I just mean, give it to the cause, because they basically damaged, nearly destroyed his channel for censorship reasons. I'm saying that is a fail. That is a deep fail. And I understand that Donald Trump is going to take issue and go after the Israel thing, basically trying to conflate anti-Semitism with opposition to the Israeli government. Yes, that is true. But the Democratic Party, almost as a rule, almost accepted as a party base, wants to go after free speech. You can hear them, even when they're talking on the news. Yeah, man, we need our own Joe Rogan. Well, you can't have your own Joe Rogan because your point of view is so narrow, and regardless of what you can say, that you can't have those conversations. They've decided, even if you look at after the election, the issue is that people could say too much, and they would say things that wasn't in our liking or against our interests. I'm pointing out that there are all sorts of reasons that people didn't vote for Harris, weren't going to vote for Harris. And if you're talking about a Joe Rogan who has a show that requires the ability to have free speech, and you have a campaign that is against free speech, then by definition, he's going to take issue with that. That doesn't make him a Republican. Full stop. Nor does that make him MAGA. Full stop. Again, if you had a candidate that was worth a damn, you would probably get Joe Rogan. Again, Sanders got Joe Rogan. So the notion that the man is somehow this flaming right winger is not the case. And if you are coming to that assessment, then that's more about you than him. I've only ever heard Democrats say that. I've only heard liberals say that. Regular people just consider Joe Rogan with certain points of view that you would agree with and disagree with, just like every other person that typically you would run into on a daily basis. It is your democratic bona fides, your liberalism, that makes you look at the world through this very narrow window where you are excluding people like Joe Rogan just because he's a regular person. Your show was not meant to be MSNBC. Your show was meant to be something else. And no, I know I can't necessarily tell the man what his show was supposed to be about, but when I remember him as being this kind of scrappy lefty that didn't necessarily follow the tropes of the typical Democratic line. When I see that, or when I see this, this tells me where you are. This tells me where you are. When I see you boosting Harris as if she was going to win, when the polling clearly showed that Trump had taken a lead in all of those swing states, then again, that tells me where you are. Joe Rogan is that, this right winger. He's not, I'm sorry, he's not. And trying to say that he is more like Rush Limbaugh is just outrageous. Outrageous. Again, I get that people like you, Joy and Reed, have lost their minds. Come back to the light. Joy and Reed was always nuts. You can be better. You can be better. Joe Rogan is a regular guy. No more, no less. That's it. He has opinions that you dislike. He would have opinions that you agree with. And again, the man was a Bernie-crat. So that blows this notion that he is some kind of flaming right-winger out the window. And that brings into question what you are. Like, share, subscribe.